Welcome. If you're joining us online, we're going to be studying Chapter 11 today, which is about internal control and the COSO framework. COSO, or Committee of Sponsoring Organizations, we'll see it's a blue ribbon panel put together to think about what is good internal control. They set some standards for internal control, which are really regarded as the gold standards for good internal control. So if a company has good internal control, that's great. They have low control risk, fewer misstatements on a day-to-day basis, cheaper audit because their financial statements are probably okay. If a client has messed up internal control, that means high control risk. That means a greater probability of misstatements. And that means a higher audit bill because the auditor must do more work. So let's study what internal control entails, and then we'll see how the auditor goes about studying and evaluating internal control. So let me go ahead and share my screen here with you. Chapter 11 notes look like that. So with internal control, we don't have to study everything about it. Instead, we're going to study it from the auditor's viewpoint. So good, that helps limit the amount of material that we have to go over. And of course, whenever we can limit the amount of material, so much the better because we already have enough stuff to study. Thank you. So let's see this. Well, the auditor's concerned with studying and evaluating clients' internal control in order to determine control risk as we know. That's the probability that a material misstatement is not prevented and or detected by internal control. Of course, we want that to be as low as possible. So if control risk is low, that's good. The auditor will have to conduct fewer substantive tests, especially tests of details later in the audit because there's some assurance those financial statements are fairly stated. But conversely, if control risk is high, that's bad. The auditor is going to have to conduct more substantive tests because probably the client's financial statements had misstatements in them, material ones at that. And as we know, the auditor is going to conduct test controls to evaluate internal control. We often use the example of approving credit for credit sales. Well, the test control there is check for a credit approval number or in a manual system, someone's initials. If it's present, that transaction has passed the test control. If not present, that transaction failed. Not good. Now, in B, what is internal control? Well, it comprises the people, policies, procedures, documents, etc., which are designed to ensure the company's goals are met. That part is called internal administrative control. And the transactions are recorded and summarized so that financial statements can be prepared which are in accordance with GAAP. And so the assets are safeguarded. That part is called internal accounting control. Now, which one do you think the auditor is more concerned with? Internal accounting control or internal administrative? Internal accounting control, you got it. So we'll limit our study to that. Well, we can note the clients are concerned with both internal administrative control and internal accounting control. This means the clients are concerned about compliance with applicable laws and regulations. It's part of it. Efficiency and effectiveness of operations, making sure their goals are met. And also the reliability of financial reporting. That's internal accounting control. However, the financial auditor, which is what we are, is concerned only with internal accounting control. And for a little bit of legislative mandate here. Well, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act of 1977 and the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 also mandate certain aspects of internal control for SEC companies. Those two acts are often mentioned. So if we're publicly traded, it means we better have good internal control. The SEC will not like it if we don't. Well, in particular, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act requires management to issue an internal control report. We saw that in Chapter 3. It's reproduced again for us in this chapter. Have a look at when you have a chance. We've seen it already. So, management must issue a 404 report that says we believe everything's okay with internal control, and then the auditor audits internal control and make sure the internal control truly is okay. So management issues a 404 report, and so is the auditor. So that's why I mentioned we have the additional reporting, the 404 report, which the auditor must perform regarding internal control for an SEC client. We know that requires an audit of internal control, thus goes beyond the normal testing of internal control for an audit of the financial statements of a non-issuer. And that's illustrated on page 53 back in Chapter 3. We saw at that time, as in a financial statement audit, the 404 report may be unqualified. That's what everybody wants. Qualified, adverse, or a disclaimer of opinion. Not good. I saw an adverse one time. I can't remember if I told you about it. It was for General Motors. Did I mention that? No. Okay. Well, back several years ago, General Motors was under government administration for a while because it was going under. So it was under government administration. And when they emerged from that, in the first year, the auditor's 404 report was adverse. Said their internal control isn't working. And General Motors management, in their version of the 404 report, essentially said, what do you expect? We just emerged from government administration, and well, federal government got a 404 report. You'd expect an adverse one too. That's what they said in a nutshell. Not quite that smart alecky, but you get the drift. Now see, the auditor primarily will conduct test controls by examining individual transactions, see whether internal control is properly followed, just like those individual sales transactions, making sure internal control is followed for each one. Well, control risk can vary by financial cycle. So test controls usually are performed by classes of transactions. And test controls are not surprisingly, pardon me, designed to satisfy the transaction-related audit objectives. So in other words, if we do test controls transaction by transaction, we can classify those transactions and think about them according to transaction-related audit objectives. That's all that means. Now, D, we remember that the client's management is responsible for things like internal control, for the accounting function, for preventing and detecting fraud and illegal acts. And also the concept of reasonable assurance is applicable to internal control. It's not going to prevent everything. We cannot give absolute assurance that it will, only reasonable assurance. What that also means, looking on here in D, is that an internal control procedure should not be in place unless benefits exceed the costs. So we're not going to over-control things. We're not going to spend more money on internal control than it's worth. This also means that internal control does not provide absolute assurance of preventing and or detecting material misstatements, whether caused by unintentional error or by fraud. So again, control risk, if we think about it, can never be zero. We wish it could, but there's no way that we can say with certainty that zero misstatements will get by internal control. Life just isn't that perfect. Now, we mentioned before about inherent limitations of internal control. Well, that includes, it can be circumvented by either management override or by employee collusion. So, management override, management takes advantage of their position and they do as they please. That can happen because they're at such a high rank. Employee collusion, we'll see a little bit later about segregation of duties. Well, if we properly segregated duties, different employees doing different things, they could get together and collude. And one takes the money and the other covers it up in the books, for example, as we used the other day. Well, we also saw the other day that with fraud, employee collusion is involved in a great number of frauds. So we'll turn our attention to that once again, once we study segregation of duties a little bit later. And some other inherent limitations, circumstances may change over time. A degree of compliance with internal control may deteriorate as well. So circumstances can change over time. For example, we lose some key employees, they decide to retire, which has been a big thing right now during the pandemic, for example. Degree of compliance may deteriorate. Maybe the new employees coming in just don't care as much. So again, for all these things, control risk can never be zero. By the way, with the pandemic, with professors, there's been a lot of retirement of college faculty. And with administrative positions, one position where there have been a lot of retirements has been in financial aid directors. Things like the CARES Act and other more complicated compliance requirements. Well, it's kind of like, do I really want to stay with this? It's been too bad. Then F. The use of information technology, or IT, poses some unique internal control risks because the way in which transactions are initiated, recorded, processed, and reported. So often many duties are in fact combined by IT. We'll see they should be segregated just a bit, but the computer does it all. Well, one major compensating control is the separation of users of IT, such as those having record-keeping responsibility, so the day-to-day employees, from those employees who have operational responsibility for IT. Things like systems analysts, people like programmers, etc. If we combine the two, things could go wrong. For example, if we allow our salespeople who have operational responsibility to get in and change software that controls the assignment of commissions to them, what do you think would suddenly happen to their commissions? They go way up, you bet. So you always want to segregate there. So any questions there so far? Well, I'd like for us to take a look at components of the internal control structure next. So what are components of good internal control that we want to see built into a company? And much of the material in this section was taken from the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations, or COSO, their internal control framework. Again, they've sat down, they've thought about what is good internal control. Here's a framework for it. So let's see, the big things are in that framework. They're not difficult. But as you can guess, they're heavily tested on the CPA exam too. So I'm going to refer to a table in our book in just a moment to overview the 5 components of good internal control the COSO says they need to see. Now, for 3 of these, I'm just going to see the table and I will come back to handout and look at the others. But for control environment, Management risk assessment, they should be assessing risk on an ongoing basis. And the accounting communication system, we'll just see this table on page 348. Pull it up. Let me go through the sign-in process here. Yep. Okay. So, if we look here, COSO components of internal control and some underlying principles. So right here, we've got some components of internal control that every company should have. First of all, let's see what the first component is, the control environment. So the actions, policies, and procedures that reflect the overall attitude of top management, directors, and owners of an entity about internal control and its importance. So this is something we've talked about before, the toe at the top. So some principles, some things we need to see. Integrity and ethical values. So for example, here at Florida Southern, definitely we have them. Board of Director and audit committee participation. Board of Trustees, in our case, definitely they participate, they oversee things as they should. Then the organizational structure, so that everybody knows their job and so the duties are segregated properly. Then commitment to competence, commitment to quality, running a tight ship, and all those good things. Here at Florida Southern, we definitely are. That's why we've won so many awards, tell you the truth, including number 8 in the nation for best undergraduate teaching. Remember that one from US News and World Report. Including a lot of awards for the beauty of the campus too. So beautiful campus, nice winters. That must entice people from up north, don't you think? It does. Yep, better coming here than, as we've said, going to one of those 100 plus small private schools in Ohio. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Mary.
Just a question.
Of course.
Are you highlighting the awards that Florida Southern or any other company has as a way that employees would feel pride and not want to steal from you?
Very true. Yeah, we do emphasize those. So we have a nice quality school here. And hopefully that instills in them, let's not mess it up. Whereas if we have a small private school that isn't doing very well, there are a lot of them out there right now, including some of them, I'm sure, in Ohio, then, and maybe it's even going to close, a lot of them will, then maybe employees might feel like, well, so what? I may as well get my shot in here too and get something for myself. Yeah. Get it while getting is good. That's a really good point, Mary. Yeah, I keep wondering how some of those schools in Ohio are doing, like Heidelberg University and Defiance University, and get some of the others, but there are a whole bunch of them. And they're all just alike for the most part. So not differentiated. And they can't brag about their beautiful campuses either. Although the Methodist School, Ohio Wesleyan, as we've said, stands above them, so it's going to do well. Oh, Ohio Northern University is another one. Our previous dean came from that, but they've lost a whole bunch of enrollment, I know. So, but we haven't. Our enrollment's actually gone up. Financially, we're doing really well. So you can rest assured, because who would want to go to a small private school and it's having financial difficulty? Ooh, that might mean it's not a going concern in the future. That might mean they don't have nice things going on campus because they have to save money. Ooh. Well, then another thing we need is accountability. So holding people accountable, making sure that they make a mistake, they have to own up to it, etc. If you don't hold people accountable, well, they'll feel they can get by. Well, then risk assessments. We've said management should be doing this on an ongoing basis. For example, as they are looking to make sure that they are not subject to data breaches, to someone hacking into their information system and getting information out of there or manipulating information. And we know as fast computers work, even a breach that doesn't last very long can cause a lot of damage. We can talk to a whole bunch of companies about that, including, as we know, Facebook. Yeah, oh, and Facebook is changing the name of the parent company to Meta. Yeah, to read about that, Mark Zuckerberg was talking about it. And Meta in Hebrew is, well, spelled a little differently, META, but it's a word for dead. So we can think about that. Yeah. If Moshe were here today, he could tell us more about it. He knows Hebrew. Yes, Mark Zuckerberg does, even though he's Jewish. I don't think he's Jewish. All right. So, management's identification and analysis of risks relevant to preparation of financial statements in accordance with appropriate accounting frameworks such as GAAP or IFRS. So some things we need to do over here on the right-hand side. Have clear objectives in order to identify risks related to those objectives. And determine how risks should be managed. And consider the potential for fraud, again, like a data breach, and monitor changes. And then also from the book, I said we take a look at the information communication system component. So it means methods used to initiate, record, process, and report an entity's transactions to maintain accountability for related assets. So accounting information and other types of information here. So some things we need to make sure to happen. Use relevant quality information, support the functioning of internal controls. Make sure it's reliable, for example. If we use unreliable information, it's going to be garbage in, garbage out. We'll get financial statements that aren't reliable either. Then communicate information internally, including objectives and responsibilities for internal control, so everybody knows what's going on. And then communicate with external parties relevant information related to internal controls, so that they know too. Any questions here so far? Righty? Something for a second. Let me come to control activities, and let's just take a look at what's in the book, and then I'm going to elaborate more in the notes because there's some additional information we need. So with control activities, well, policies and procedures and management established to meet its objectives for financial reporting. Okay. Sounds easy enough, and we'll see some of those policies and procedures. Some things we'll do, we'll develop control activities that mitigate risk to an appropriate level. For example, making sure that we appropriately segregate duties. And then we'll develop general controls over technology. General controls override technology in general within the organization, such as making sure that our information systems people are separated from our employees who have day-to-day operational responsibility. It even goes right down to making sure that we have a reliable power supply for our network. Because if power goes down, like in a hurricane, the network goes down too. And that's happened to a lot of businesses. And then establish appropriate policies, procedures, and expectations. Okay, let's put that to work over here in the notes. So number 4 there is control activities. Well, one principle is clients should have appropriate controls in place at each control point. And a control point exists whenever an intentional error or fraud could occur, including recording transactions and safeguarding assets. For example, when cash comes into the business, that's always a major control point. We need a lot of internal control there because a lot of things can go wrong. And we're going to add some things to this because the book needs it. So one thing I mentioned very frequently, separation or segregation of duties. Well, one thing is someone should not be placed in a position where they can pull something and cover it up. So they should not be placed in a position where they can commit fraud and cover it up. We definitely don't want that. So for example, as we've discussed, the person having custody of cash, we don't want them keeping the related records for cash, the related accounting records, such as cash receipts journal or cash disbursements journal. If so, they could steal some of that cash and cover it up in the books. So we always want those two duties segregated, as we'll see in a moment. Well, segregation of duties also means that we have checks and balances to prevent, detect innocent errors. We really do. Like different people proofreading each other's work. Because we have to proofread our own work, often we don't find problems. We know that. Well, therefore, the following duties should be segregated or performed by different people. And by the way, the textbook does not give a clear breakdown of these duties. So you should learn them from here. These duties, well, they hint at the breakdown, but they don't enumerate it very clearly. So on the CPA exam, you will be expected to know what I have here because this is what comes from the COSO framework. So one thing, custody of an asset. Again, just like custody of cash. Separate that from record keeping or accounting for the asset. Because if we allow someone with custody of cash to keep the cash receipts and cash disbursements journal, perfect opportunity to take some cash and cover it up. Then something separate, authorization of transactions pertaining to asset. For example, if we allow this person to formally authorize cash disbursements, well, to whom do you think they're going to authorize cash disbursement? To themselves. Just like Judy Halter up at Payne Air Conditioning. Yeah, she had custody of cash. She kept the related books for cash. She did things like sign checks, which is authorization of cash disbursements. She authorized electronic transfer of funds for cash disbursements. Those went to her own private bank accounts. She She did a number of little tricks. And I'm sure that the little convenience store across from the library still misses her on her daily visits after work. From what I understand, she was a pleasant person. So they probably enjoyed visiting with her in there. Plus, they made some money. Sure. She spent more. Yeah. And she won 75,000 at one time. Wow. Plus, I'm sure smaller amounts too. But yeah, she always thought she would put the money back in the system, but she couldn't really figure out how with 75,000. Plus, it was just like, oh my gosh, I've got all this money right now. Wow, if I invest that back into playing the lottery with my friends at the Stop and Shop or Stop and Go, whatever it was, I could really make it big now. So that greed just kept getting bigger and bigger with her gambling addiction. Yeah, when she won 75,000, I wonder if she made an appropriate contribution to her church. That's a really good question too. Because she was church going. She was active in her church. So again, that helped her look the part of not being a fraudster. Well, then something else separate number 4. Internal verification pertaining to asset. So internal verification that's pertaining to that asset, that means somebody checking over what's going on. Sometimes in AIS books, that's called supervision. That's okay. From an auditing standpoint, we tend to call it internal verification. But doing a bank rec is internal verification. Simply checking over the books is internal verification. That should be done on a daily basis. Well, nobody was doing these things for Judy. In fact, she did her own bank rec. So how many problems do you think she ever turned up on that bank rec? None. Things were going just perfectly. And Mr. Payne, that owns the business, thought, oh, that's great. Everything's working fine with Judy. She's been here all these years. She really knows what she's doing. She's honest. Yeah, she looks so honest. I mean, here she is. She's a long time. Yeah, I'm happy. That's right. Yeah, she's always such a happy employee. Yeah, she comes in here and she's always so happy. And every Sunday she's in church and she's active in her church. So if I can't trust her, whom can I trust? Now, she flew under the radar. Plus, every evening as we leave work, she stops and sees her friends at the Stop and Shop, Stop and Go, wherever it is. I always vow that I'm going to look that up and see if it's Stop and Shop or Stop and Go. But even if I do, I'll forget. I know it's one or the other. Stop and Shop, okay. You know just where I'm talking about. It's next to Mr. Fish, or almost next to it. Yeah. Wait, no, it's not. I take that back. It's not. It's fairly close. Pardon? Yes, you're right. Yeah, not too far from Mr. Fish. I've never been to Mr. Fish. It's supposed to be good. Has anyone ever been? I've never been to Mr. Fish. Is it good? Okay. I need to go sometime. I know. I've lived in Lakeland over 11 years now, and I've never been. That is shameful. I've never been to that famous landmark. Sounds like a lot of you haven't been either. Sounds like we better do our duty and go. Yeah, Kat Eskin, my co-sponsor, Hillel, a lot of you know her English professor. She's always talking about how good Mr. Fish is, and we need to go there. Well, yeah, we do. We keep vowing to go, but we never have. And I keep telling her I've lived in Lakeland all these years. Well, when we first started talking about that, that was several years ago. So now I've lived in Lakeland even more years, and I still haven't been to this landmark, Mr. Fish. So I don't know. I better catch up. And I still need to go at the Stop and Shop. Yeah, I'll say, hi, did you all miss Betty? Or Paint Air Conditioning does my air conditioner at home. I could call up and say, is Betty there? But actually, while she still worked there, a couple of times when I called, she answered the phone. And she was very pleasant, very efficient. Oh yeah, she was a good employee. I mean, outside her little problem. Yeah. But yeah, who would have questioned her? Now, little Roman numeral 5 there. In some areas, operations or execution of transactions, same thing, maybe also be a separate duty. For example, we want a separate sales staff. Their mission is to go out there and sell. So the sales staff, if we allow them to do things such as authorize credit, everybody's going to suddenly get credit because they want to max out on their sales. Or as I mentioned, if we allow them to have some IT duties, if they could dicker with software that controls the amount of commissions are assigned, or if they could dicker with software that controls customer credit files, like credit limits, suddenly a lot of credit limits would go up. Well, then, little Roman numeral 6. So we've said IT often leads to duties being combined. I'll show you an example in a second on page 344. And also, as we said, one key control is separate IT duties, such as access software, from users outside IT that have operational responsibilities, like our sales staff. Thus, no one employee should have IT duties and operational duties. Look here with you on page 344. There we go. The separation of IT duties from user departments. So they really sum things up quite well here for us. As the level of complexity of IT systems increases, the separation of authorization, record keeping, and custody often becomes blurred because the computer does that. For example, sales agents may enter customer orders online. The computer authorizes those sales based on its comparison of customer credit limits to the master file and posts all approved sales in sales cycle journals. Therefore, the computer plays a significant role in the authorization and record keeping of sales transactions. And to compensate for these potential overlaps of duties, it's important for companies to separate major IT-related functions from key user department functions. In this example, responsibility for design, controlling, and accounting software programs that contain the sales authorization posting controls should be under the authority of IT. Whereas the ability to update the information in the master file of customer credit limits should reside in the company's credit department outside the IT function. So again, let's not get our IT people confused with our people who have day-to-day operational responsibilities. If we don't segregate, we're asking for trouble. Any questions so far? Well, another internal control activity that we need to see in addition to segregation of duties is authorization, either specific or general. So everything should be authorized in one way or another. With general authorization, that's authorizing a general class of transactions take place, such as a policy that we accept MasterCard, Visa, and American Express. Maybe Discover. Yes, Discover's still out there. Yeah. Just how many of you Discover. You do? Oh, okay. So it is still out there. Good. So we accept all those. Specific authorization would be running a specific sale through the system to authorize credit. So a customer comes to us and they buy something, and we have them insert their credit card with the chip in the machine. So that's specific authorization. Then another basic control activity, adequate documents and records. So these should be pre-numbered whenever possible. And pre-numbers assure both existence and completeness. They will help in statistical sampling. And the auditor's accounting for pre-numbers, a dual purpose test. I will show you how. So pre-numbers, really, really good, like pre-number checks in our checkbook. So existence. We do not overstate. Overstatements would violate existence because we never record a pre-number twice. Just like we record a pre-number check twice in our check register, we would overstate our cash disbursement transactions. Pre-numbers would make it obvious that we're doing that, so we're not going to. Pre-numbers ensure completeness because if a pre-number is missing, we didn't record it, our books are not complete. Then, they help in statistical sampling, which is something that we'll study about in the second auditing course. We can match a random number up uniquely to each pre-numbered document. So very handy for that. The auditor accounts for pre-numbers. The auditor should do that. It's a dual purpose test. It is a test of control because all the pre-numbers should be there, recorded once and only once. It is also a substantive test of transactions because if pre-numbers are messed up, dollar amounts will be messed up too in those accounts. So those are always easy answers for pre-numbers. So you'll know those just in case they ask on the CPA exam. Also, they are prepared as soon as possible for timing. So good, those take care of a lot of audit objectives there. And pre-numbers will also establish an audit trail for transactions so we can follow them through. Now, another necessary document and record is the chart of accounts. That way we know which accounts we have, what the official names are, what the account numbers are. So we can punch in those account numbers as we're entering data, and the account name will automatically come up as an echo check on the screen. That's nice. We don't have to type in that account title all the time. I should say the account title will pop up on the screen as an echo check. That's great. We don't have to type in that account name all the time. That would get long, that account title. Well, further, The client should have all internal control documented in a policies and procedures, or your book often says policies and systems manual. That may be less formal in a small company. That's another necessary record. Just like the college catalog is a policies and procedures manual for Florida Southern. By the way, note the documents may be paper and or electronic. Same information is on both. The electronic documents start with an input screen, which should be carefully designed to minimize errors, such as by rejecting invalid vendor codes. So there's no such vendor. There's no such company to buy from. That's very good to help prevent fraud, because a lot of frauds involve an employee setting up a phony company, selling phony stuff to the company, to the client, and the client starts paying for these phony purchases. So I have to be really careful there. And also, screens should maximize efficiency. Screen numbers should also be assigned automatically. And of course, everything should have adequate security with passwords, etc. Well, then D, something else we must have: physical controls over assets and records. So lock them up, protect them from the elements, protect them from theft, etc. Protect them from power surges. Well, then E, we also need independent checks on performance, and that same thing's internal verification. Well, then a fifth component that we will need, and I will show it to you in the book in just a bit, but monitoring. To ensure the IT is operating as intended, modify as perfect. This is strengthened by an internal audit function, which is also a good type of internal verification in many circumstances. And also the size of the business often affects how formal the internal control system is. For example, in an owner-operated firm, the owner's involvement is often a very good compensating control. In other words, first blush, it looks like, internal control is not so good because there aren't that many employees here. Can't segregate duties properly. But if the owner's involved in managing company on a day-to-day basis, this way the owner's going to make sure things go properly. So that's the best compensating control I can think of. Unfortunately, in air conditioning, Mr. Payne was not doing that. I'm sure he is really good at doing things like repairing air conditioning systems. Well, back Payne air conditioning is really good at that in general. But I guess he just didn't understand the business side of things. And that happens with a lot of people who are really good at their craft, but they don't understand the business side. Well, being on owner-operated companies are often small, so may not have enough employees to segregate all the proper functions. In this case, owner involvement is critically important. And the owner should also perform authorization and internal verification personally if possible. Check over things which Mr. Payne wasn't doing. Authorize payments, which again, Mr. Payne wasn't doing. Judy did it all, according to herself. And also, it's a good idea for the owner to open the mail, prevent customer payments from being stolen. So, open the mail personally, take out the check or money order the customer sent, deposit personally. Then give the documentation to whomever is keeping the cash receipts charge. But don't give the check to that person too, because if you're giving it to someone like Judy, she's going to deposit it into her own personal bank account. And she did. And to let you know, the last part of the chapter contains some information relating to information technology. It's covered in your AIS course. You can have a look at it if you want. If not, that's okay too. Wow. Look, we're all done with that chapter. That went a lot faster than I thought. How did everything go in the chapter? Understandable? Yeah, I think this internal control information really is. Just see something here. Control's not too terribly long either. All right. So what I will do, I'll declare the rest time lab time today, unless you just really want to get in chapter 12. So I hear, oh, good, Carter, rousing enthusiasm. I am so happy. Can I hear rousing enthusiasm for everybody else too? Yeah, well, okay, we don't want that. Somehow you wouldn't look very good hanging there. No. Okay, that's not the look. No. So, okay, well, we'll go ahead and save chapter 12 until Monday then. All right, we'll have a great weekend because I won't see you till Monday. And take care. All right, bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thanks, you do the same. Take care. Oh, it's not, yeah, chapter 11. Oh, because I was going to say chapter 11 is on my accounting lab. I thought that's what you were asking about, Will. Oh, so she's into chapter 11 as well.